Admiral Kethvar stood at the center of a decision that would reshape not just his reality, but multiple timelines across dimensional space. The weight of infinite possibilities pressed down on him as he considered the choice before him. Trust beings who claimed benevolence while wielding the power of gods, or resist and potentially condemn countless species to war and extinction. "I need to understand something," he said finally, looking directly at Commander Chun. "In all these realities where humanity develops these capabilities, do you always become the dominant species? Are there timelines where other races achieve transcendence first?" Dr. Vasquez smiled and gestured. The holographic display shifted, showing new configurations of space where other species had achieved similar technological breakthroughs. "Admiral, we're part of a larger collective. In some realities, the crystalline collective discovered dimensional manipulation first. In others, it was the cetaceans or even the energy beings from the Vega system. The important thing isn't which species leads. It's that someone develops the wisdom to use these capabilities responsibly." "Show me," Kethvar demanded. The display transformed, revealing a vast network connecting billions of realities. In each one, different species had achieved transcendence, but they all followed the same pattern, using their advanced capabilities to protect and improve life rather than dominate it. Humans were just one node in an infinite web of civilizations that had learned to put compassion above conquest. "The Federation you've encountered," Captain Nakamura explained, "is actually a multidimensional collective. We coordinate with transcended versions of every major species to ensure the best possible outcomes across all realities. When we intervene in a timeline, it's not as conquerors, but as representatives of the combined wisdom of countless civilizations." Dr. Hines looked up from his scanner, his expression shifting from concern to something approaching awe. "Admiral, I'm detecting quantum signatures from species we've never encountered. The probability matrices show technological contributions from civilizations that exist beyond our current detection capabilities. This isn't human dominance. It's galactic cooperation on a scale we can't even comprehend." Commander Chen nodded. "Marcus, remember our discussions about the Fermi paradox 15 years ago? Where are all the advanced civilizations? We found them. They exist in the spaces between realities, working to guide younger species toward prosperity rather than destruction. What you're seeing is graduation day for this region of space." "Graduation?" Admiral Kethvar asked. "Every species reaches a point where they must choose between wisdom and power, between cooperation and domination," Dr. Vasquez explained. The Galactic Council was approaching that decision point. In most timelines, they choose poorly and the results are catastrophic. We're offering a way to skip the catastrophe and move directly to the benefits of transcended civilization. The display showed timeline after timeline where the council system eventually collapsed into war. Kethvar watched his own species fighting desperately for survival as resources dwindled and conflict escalated. He saw the cetaceans' water worlds boiled dry by orbital bombardment, the crystalline collective shattered by weapons that disrupted their quantum matrices, entire regions of space left barren and lifeless. "In the timelines where we don't intervene," Commander Chen said softly, "your species has a survival rate of approximately 12%. Most member species of the Council fare worse. And in timelines where you do intervene, 100% survival rate, with quality of life improvements that exceed what most species thought possible." The mathematics of the situation were overwhelming. Resist integration and condemn billions to potential death and suffering. Accept integration and surrender the illusion of independence in exchange for prosperity beyond imagination. But there was still one question that troubled him. What happens to individual choice? To the right of people to make their own mistakes, live their own lives without intervention from transcended beings. "That's the beauty of multidimensional reality," Captain Nakamura replied. "Individual choice doesn't disappear, it multiplies. Every person who wants to live in a reality without intervention can do so. Every being who chooses challenge over comfort, struggle over ease, can find a timeline that provides exactly that experience. We're not eliminating choice. We're making sure every choice becomes available." Dr. Webb manipulated his device again, showing Kethvar the personal level of what integration meant. He saw versions of his own crew living in different realities. Some had chosen worlds of perpetual challenge where they could test themselves against genuine adversity. Others had chosen peaceful worlds where they could focus on art, science, and philosophy. A few had chosen to become explorers of the dimensional barriers themselves, seeking new realities and new possibilities. "Admiral," said Commander Vexhai, "I chose integration because it meant my children could grow up in a universe where their potential isn't limited by the accident of what resources their birth planet happened to possess. They can become anything they can imagine, explore any path that calls to them. How is that not a better form of freedom?" Admiral Zorax leaned forward. "Kethvar, I've seen my people develop technologies in the past month that we would never have achieved in 1,000 years under the old system. We're not just surviving anymore. We're contributing to something magnificent. Every day, our scientists work alongside beings from dimensions we didn't know existed, solving problems we didn't know could be solved." Council member Threek's compound eyes glittered with excitement. "The Hive has achieved perfect coordination not just within our own species, but with every other integrated civilization. We share knowledge and resources instantly across dimensional barriers. Individual colonies that once struggled for basic survival now have access to the accumulated wisdom of infinite realities." The testimonials painted a picture of existence elevated beyond anything Kethvar had thought possible. But still, something in his military training rebelled against surrendering authority to anyone, no matter how benevolent their intentions. "What safeguards exist?" he asked. "What prevents the Federation from eventually becoming corrupt, from using this power for domination rather than protection?" "The same thing that prevents any transcended civilization from becoming corrupt," Dr. Vasquez replied. "When you can see across infinite realities, you understand the ultimate consequences of every action. Corruption and domination always lead to entropy and collapse. Cooperation and compassion lead to infinite growth and prosperity. The mathematics of morality become obvious when you have sufficient data." Commander Chin stepped closer, her expression serious but kind. "Admiral, I understand your concerns because I shared them once. The Sarachun you knew 15 years ago would have been terrified by what we're offering. But fear of power is only useful when power is limited. When power is infinite, as it is across dimensional barriers, the only logical choice is to use it for the greatest good. And you're certain you know what that good is?" "We know what it isn't," Chin replied. "We've seen the timelines where species cling to independence at the cost of extinction. We've seen realities where the strong dominate the weak until nothing remains but ash and regret. We're offering an alternative that has been tested across millions of realities and proven to work." Admiral Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Dr. Hines watched him with scientific curiosity, eager to explore the possibilities the humans offered. Lieutenant Commander Zeph's tentacles trembled with excitement as she processed the technical implications of Federation technology. Even his most conservative officers seemed intrigued by the prospect of worlds without scarcity or conflict. "If I agree to integration," he said slowly, "what happens to the versions of my people who might prefer the old system?" "They continue to exist in realities where the old system persists," Captain Nakamura assured him. "Integration doesn't erase alternatives. It adds new possibilities. Your species will exist across multiple timelines, with every individual able to choose the reality that suits their preferences. And if I refuse, then you return to your original timeline, and events proceed as they would have without our intervention." In approximately 47 years, the Council system experiences cascading failures that lead to galactic war. Some species survive. Many don't. But the choice will have been yours to make. The brutal honesty of the statement hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Refuse their offer and watch his civilization slowly destroy itself. Accept their offer and surrender the independence his species had fought for millennia to achieve. But was independence worth more than survival? Was the right to make mistakes more valuable than the opportunity to transcend limitations that had plagued civilized beings since the dawn of consciousness? He thought of his homeworld, of the children who would grow up in either a galaxy of infinite possibility or one of increasing scarcity and conflict. He thought of the scientific discoveries that could be made with access to knowledge from multiple realities, the artistic achievements possible when survival was no longer a concern, the spiritual growth that might come from understanding existence on a multidimensional scale. Dr. Hines, he said quietly, in your scientific opinion, is what they're offering real? The human scientist looked at his readings one more time, then met his admiral's eyes. Sir, every measurement I can take confirms their capabilities. The energy signatures, the dimensional manipulations, the probability cascades, it's all genuine. They possess technology that makes our understanding of physics look like a child's drawings compared to advanced mathematics. Admiral Kethvar closed his eyes and made his decision. Commander Chun, he said, opening his eyes to look directly at her. I accept integration for my timeline. Not because I trust you completely, but because the alternative leads to consequences I cannot accept. If you betray this trust, if you use your power to oppress rather than liberate, history will judge you harshly across every reality you touch. Chun smiled, and, for a moment, she looked exactly like the young scientist he remembered from Dr. Hines' stories. Admiral, in accepting integration, you're not surrendering to us. You're joining us. Welcome to the Federation. Now let's build something wonderful together. The reality around them began to shift as dimensional barriers dissolved and reformed. Through the viewports, Kethvar could see his fleet transforming, upgrading itself with technologies that made matter and energy dance to the commands of conscious will. In the distance, he could see worlds repositioning themselves in optimal configurations, species meeting each other for the first time across dimensional space, and the birth of a civilization that spanned infinite realities. The galaxy had indeed stood frozen at the moment of decision. But now it moved forward, carrying every species toward possibilities that no single reality could have contained. And at the center of it all, humanity served not as conquerors but as guides, helping the universe itself evolve beyond the limitations of ordinary existence. The age of scarcity was ending. The age of transcendence had begun. 3 standard rotations later, Elena found herself aboard the hegemony flagship Infinite Recursion, a vessel so large it had its own weather systems. The ship represented the pinnacle of galactic technology, with quantum computers embedded in its very hull and weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets. Yet despite all this power, the atmosphere aboard the ship was one of barely controlled panic. The emergency task force assembled by the Council included representatives from every major species, their best minds working frantically to understand the human analysis of the Void Cascade. Elena had been given unprecedented access to the galaxy's most closely guarded secrets, databases that contained the accumulated knowledge of civilizations spanning millions of years. What she found there changed everything. The patterns go back further than we thought, Elena announced to the assembled task force. She stood before a holographic display that stretched across the ship's main conference chamber, showing data streams that would have overwhelmed most organic minds. Much further, the prime calculator materialized beside her, his mathematical form shifting as he processed the implications. Define further, human Elena. Try 65 million years. Elena replied, manipulating the display to show historical astronomical data. The cascade isn't the first time this has happened. The chamber erupted in confused voices from dozens of species. Elena waited for the translation systems to catch up before continuing. The galactic databases contain records of similar phenomena throughout history. The Great Silence, 65 million years ago, when an entire spiral arm went dark. The emptying 30 million years ago, when the Varadi collective simply vanished along with their entire territory. The databases list these as natural disasters or the results of unknown catastrophic events. She highlighted sections of the display, showing the same quantum signatures her neural implant had detected in the current cascade. They weren't natural disasters. They were harvest cycles. Dr. Keth Hai, the Cylonian xenobiologist whose crystalline structure pulsed with agitation, stepped forward. You're suggesting this intelligence has been systematically harvesting galactic civilizations for millions of years. That's impossible. We would have detected evidence of such an entity. Would you? Elena asked. How do you detect something that operates from outside your dimensional framework? It's like asking a two-dimensional being to detect a three-dimensional observer. The entity exists in spaces we can't perceive, only interacting with our reality when it needs to feed. Commander Vexthor of the Apex Consortium slammed one of his 6 arms against the conference table. Feed on what? What could such an entity possibly gain from destroying civilizations? Elena's neural implant chimed as it finished processing terabytes of historical data. The answer it provided made her stomach clench with horrific understanding. Consciousness, she said quietly. It feeds on consciousness itself. The silence that followed was broken only by the ambient hum of the ship's systems. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Every sapient being that dies in the cascade doesn't just cease to exist. Their consciousness is absorbed, becoming part of something larger. The quantum patterns we've been tracking aren't just energy signatures. They're the accumulated awareness of trillions of beings, compressed and transmitted to some kind of central collection point. The prime calculator's form flickered as his vast intellect struggled to process this information. The philosophical implications alone. You're describing a form of existence that transcends individual identity while somehow preserving the components of consciousness that give it meaning. I'm describing a cosmic horror that has been playing the long game for longer than most species have existed, Elena corrected. And, according to our projections, it's almost ready to begin the final phase. She manipulated the display again, showing the energy flow pattern she had first revealed to the Council. But now, with access to the hegemony's full sensor networks, the image was terrifyingly clear. The entity isn't just collecting consciousness randomly. It's building something specific. A construct that will allow it to exist permanently in our reality instead of just reaching through from whatever dimension it normally inhabits. Dr. Kethai's crystalline body darkened with fear. A permanent foothold in our universe. Once established, it could consume everything without having to wait between harvest cycles. Exactly, Elena said, and our analysis indicates the construct is nearly complete. The Cascade's recent acceleration isn't because it's losing control. It's because it's in the final stages of gathering the consciousness required to anchor itself in our reality. Commander Vexthor's tactical mind immediately grasped the strategic implications. How long do we have? Elena's neural implant ran the calculations one more time, hoping for a different result. Based on current consumption rates and the energy requirements for dimensional anchoring, approximately 37 standard rotations. 5 weeks, Dr. Kethai whispered, her voice barely audible through the translation matrix. The task force sat in stunned silence as the reality of their situation sank in. They weren't just facing the destruction of their civilizations. They were facing the transformation of the universe itself into something unrecognizable. There has to be something we can do, Commander Vexthor said finally. Some way to disrupt the construct or prevent the anchoring process. The combined military might of the galaxy has already been thrown against the Cascade, the prime calculator pointed out. Our most powerful weapons simply pass through it without effect. How do you fight an enemy that exists partially outside of reality? Elena had been wondering the same thing. The human approach to quantum computing had revealed the patterns, but pattern recognition was only the first step. Actually doing something about those patterns was an entirely different challenge. We need to understand more about how the consciousness transfer works, she said. The entity isn't just randomly absorbing awareness. There's a selection process, a method to how it chooses which aspects of consciousness to preserve and which to discard. She brought up a new data stream, showing the quantum signatures of recently consumed systems. Look at this. The cascade doesn't affect all conscious beings equally. Some species resist the absorption process longer than others. Some individuals within resistant species seem to maintain their identity integrity for extended periods even after their physical forms are consumed. Dr. Kethai leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. What determines resistance? Evolutionary factors? Technological augmentation? Spiritual beliefs? That's what we need to find out, Elena replied. Because if we can understand why some consciousness patterns resist absorption, we might be able to find a way to disrupt the entire collection process. The prime calculator's form brightened as he began processing this new line of inquiry. A fascinating hypothesis. If consciousness resistance is based on specific quantum characteristics, we might be able to amplify those characteristics artificially. Or, Commander Vexthor added with military pragmatism, we might be able to weaponize whatever makes consciousness indigestible to this entity. Elena nodded, but her neural implant was already identifying a problem with their research approach. We need test subjects, beings who have been partially exposed to the cascade, but somehow escaped the full absorption process. Impossible, Dr. Kethai said immediately. No one has ever survived direct contact with the cascade phenomenon. Actually, Elena said slowly, as her implant finished analyzing the survivor databases, that's not entirely true. She brought up a new display showing refugee populations from recently consumed systems. Hidden within the massive displacement statistics were a handful of anomalies. Individuals who had been present during cascade events, but had somehow escaped. 17 confirmed cases of cascade survivors across the past 10 years, Elena announced. The Galactic refugee agencies classified them as statistical anomalies, beings who happened to be in transit between systems when a cascade struck. But our analysis suggests something different. She highlighted the quantum signatures associated with each survivor. They didn't escape by accident. They resisted the absorption process long enough to physically flee the affected area. Their consciousness patterns show permanent alterations, but they retain their individual identity. Commander Vexthor was already thinking tactically. Where are these survivors now? Scattered across refugee camps throughout the inner systems, Elena replied. Most have been classified as suffering from trauma-induced psychosis because they report experiences that don't match official accounts of cascade events. Such as, Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They report hearing voices, millions of voices. The consciousness patterns of everyone who was absorbed, still aware, still screaming. The task force members exchanged glances that needed no translation. If the survivors were telling the truth, then the entity wasn't just consuming consciousness. It was keeping its victims aware and suffering their individual identities trapped within a collective nightmare. We need to interview these survivors immediately, Dr. Kethai said. If they maintained contact with the absorbed consciousness even after escaping, they might be able to provide information about the entity's internal structure. And they might be able to tell us how they resisted long enough to escape, Elena added. That information could be the key to developing countermeasures. The prime calculators form pulsed with computational activity. I can coordinate with refugee agencies to locate the survivors. However, approaching them will require extreme caution. If their consciousness patterns have been altered by exposure to the entity, direct contact might be dangerous. Elena's neural implant was already running probability calculations. The risks were significant, but the alternative was the complete absorption of galactic civilization. I'll interview them personally, she announced. Human neural implants process chaos differently than other technologies. If there's any residual connection to the entity's collective consciousness, our systems might be better equipped to handle the exposure. Absolutely not, Commander Vexthor objected immediately. We cannot risk the only being capable of analyzing the cascade patterns. The strategic value of getting more information outweighs the risk, Elena interrupted. Besides, if these survivors can teach us how to resist absorption, that knowledge needs to be in human neural implants first. We're the ones who figured out how to map chaos. We might be the only ones who can learn to survive it. Dr. Kethai's crystalline structure flared with what Elena had learned to recognize as Cylonian approval. The human approach to problem-solving continues to surprise me. Most species would want to study the survivors from a safe distance. You want to experience their condition firsthand. Sometimes the only way to understand something is to become it, Elena replied. And, right now, understanding might be the only weapon we have. The task force spent the next several hours developing protocols for survivor contact, while Elena's neural implant processed the growing mountain of data they had accumulated. The patterns were becoming clearer, but with clarity came a growing sense of cosmic horror. They weren't just fighting for their lives or their civilizations. They were fighting for the right of consciousness to exist as individual entities rather than components in some vast, alien intellect. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. But, As Elena prepared to meet with the first Cascade survivor, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The entity had been playing this game for millions of years. It had consumed entire galactic civilizations and learned from each one. Humanity had been exploring space for less than 3 centuries. What could they possibly know that the combined wisdom of eons hadn't already discovered? The answer to that question would determine whether consciousness itself had a future in the universe. The refugee camp on Kepler Station stretched across 3 habitat rings, housing nearly 2 million beings displaced by the Void Cascade. Elena walked through the cramped corridors, her neural implant automatically adjusting the translation protocols as she passed groups speaking in dozens of different languages. The air recyclers couldn't quite keep up with the biological diversity, creating an atmosphere that was technically breathable for everyone, but comfortable for no one. She found the first survivor in Section C7, area designated for beings requiring special medical attention. Zaraketh had once been a Nexary trade coordinator, her species known throughout the galaxy for their perfect mathematical minds and ability to calculate hyperspace routes without computer assistance. Now she sat motionless in a corner of the medical bay, her luminous skin flickering between colors and patterns that hurt to watch. Zaraketh, Elena approached slowly, her implant monitoring for any signs of quantum interference. "My name is Elena. I'd like to talk to you about Proxima Centauri 7. The Nexary's head turned with mechanical precision, her large black eyes focusing on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When Zaraketh spoke, her voice carried harmonics that the translation matrix couldn't quite process, creating an effect like hearing multiple conversations simultaneously. "The human who sees patterns," Zaraketh said, though her lips barely moved. "We wondered when you would come." "We?" Elena asked, though her implant had already detected the anomaly. Zaraketh's consciousness signature wasn't singular. There were fragments of other minds woven through her thought patterns, pieces of awareness that didn't belong to her. The others who escaped. The 17 who slipped through the cracks. Zaraketh's skin shifted to deep purple, a color Elena's research indicated represented profound sadness in Nexary culture. "We are connected now. Part of the harvest, but not consumed. Bridges between the individual and the collective." Elena activated her implant's recording systems, carefully documenting every quantum fluctuation in the conversation. "What happened on Proxima Centauri 7? The official reports say the system was evacuated before the Cascade arrived." "Lies," Zaraketh said simply. "Comfortable lies told by beings who were not there. We were there when the sky began to eat itself, when reality developed holes that led to somewhere else." The Nexary stood up with fluid grace, moving to the medical bay's small viewport. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly as Kepler Station maintained its rotation. But Elena noticed that Zaraketh wasn't looking at the stars. She was looking past them into the spaces between. "The Cascade doesn't begin with destruction," Zaraketh continued. "It begins with invitation. A whisper at the edge of consciousness, promising unity, promising peace. Most beings welcome it. They walk willingly into the consuming light because it offers them something they've always wanted but never had. What does it offer? Perfect understanding, complete knowledge of their place in the universe, an end to the loneliness that haunts every thinking being." Zaraketh's skin shifted to silver, reflecting the station's artificial lighting. The entity doesn't force consciousness into its collective. It seduces them, makes them want to become part of something larger than themselves. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "But you resisted. Some of us tried to resist. The 17 who escaped all shared certain characteristics. We were—" Zaraketh paused, searching for words that could convey concepts beyond normal language. "Incomplete. Damaged. Our consciousness patterns contained flaws that made the seduction less effective." "What kind of flaws?" Zaraketh turned from the viewport, her black eyes now reflecting depths that seemed to go on forever. "I was dying when the Cascade arrived. A genetic disorder that was slowly destroying my neural pathways. My consciousness was already fragmenting, becoming something the entity couldn't easily integrate." Elena's implant processed this information, comparing it with the profiles of the other 16 survivors. The others were also suffering from neurological conditions, mental illness, brain injury, genetic abnormalities. One had been experimenting with consciousness-altering drugs that left his thought patterns in constant flux. Zaraketh's skin shifted through a rainbow of colors, each one representing a different emotional state. The entity feeds on ordered consciousness, patterns it can parse and absorb. We were too chaotic, too broken for it to consume cleanly. And because you couldn't be absorbed, you maintained a connection to the collective consciousness. We became windows, Zaraketh said, cracks in the entity's perfect order through which information can leak. We hear the voices of the consumed, feel their pain, experience fragments of their memories. It is overwhelming. Elena could see the strain the connection was putting on Zaraketh. The Nexary's life signs, displayed on the medical bay's monitors, showed patterns of stress that would have killed most organic beings. Yet somehow she endured, serving as a living bridge between individual consciousness and cosmic horror. Can you tell me more about the entity's internal structure? Elena asked. How are the absorbed consciousness patterns organized? Zaraketh's response came not in words, but in a direct quantum transmission that bypassed Elena's auditory processing entirely. The information downloaded directly into her neural implant, carrying with it the weight of unimaginable suffering. Elena saw/felt/experienced the entity's true nature. It existed as a vast web of interconnected consciousness, each absorbed mind serving as a node in a network of incomprehensible complexity. But the absorbed beings weren't just components in a collective intelligence. They retained their individual awareness, trapped in an endless existence where their thoughts and memories were continuously harvested for the entity's purposes. Worse, the entity had been selectively breeding consciousness for millions of years. Each harvest cycle wasn't just about feeding. It was about evolution, about creating increasingly sophisticated forms of awareness that would provide richer sustenance. The galaxy's current civilizations represented the culmination of this process, consciousness patterns refined through eons of directed development. It's a farmer, Elena whispered, as the full horror of the situation became clear. We're not just its food, we're its crops. Zaraketh nodded, her skin now a deep black that absorbed all light. The entity has been guiding galactic evolution since the first sapient species developed tool use. Wars, technological advancement, cultural development, all of it carefully orchestrated to produce the kinds of consciousness it desires. Elena's implant was struggling to process the information it had received. The quantum structures involved in the entity's consciousness network were beyond anything in human experience, operating on principles that challenged the fundamental assumptions of neuroscience. Is there any way to disrupt the network? Elena asked. Some weakness we could exploit? The 17 windows see only fragments, Zaraketh replied. But we have observed something that may be significant. The entity's control is not absolute. There are rebellions. Rebellions? Some absorbed consciousness patterns resist integration more successfully than others. They maintain their individual identity within the collective, becoming sources of discord. The entity is forced to quarantine them in isolated sections of the network. Elena's pulse quickened. How many rebels are we talking about? Unknown. But the quarantine sections are growing. The entity has been forced to divert increasing amounts of processing power to maintaining control over its absorbed consciousness. It is stretched thin. This was the first potentially hopeful information Elena had received since the crisis began. If the entity was struggling to maintain control over its existing harvest, that might represent a vulnerability they could exploit. Could we contact these rebel consciousness patterns? Coordinate some kind of resistance from within? Zaraketh's skin flashed brilliant white, so bright that Elena had to shield her eyes. When the light faded, the Nexary was smiling, an expression that looked wrong on her alien features. The rebels have been trying to contact the outside universe for cycles. They lack the means to break through the entity's barriers on their own. But if someone from outside were to establish a connection, someone like you, a window between the collective and individual consciousness, or someone like you, Zaraketh said quietly, your neural implant processes chaos in ways the entity has never encountered. If you were to make direct contact with the rebel consciousness patterns, Elena understood immediately, and the implications terrified her. You're suggesting I allow my consciousness to be partially absorbed, to become another window. I'm suggesting that humanity's unique approach to quantum processing might allow you to maintain your individual identity within the collective while simultaneously coordinating with the rebels. You could become a virus in the entity's perfect order. The medical bay fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Elena stared out the viewport at the stars, knowing that each point of light represented billions of lives hanging in the balance. The entity's final harvest was approaching, and conventional resistance had proven useless. But perhaps unconventional resistance might succeed where technology had failed. What are the risks? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Total consciousness absorption, eternal suffering as part of the collective, or if you succeed in maintaining your identity, madness from experiencing the thoughts of trillions of absorbed beings simultaneously. Elena's neural implant was already running calculations, analyzing the quantum structures Zaraketh had transmitted. The process would require modifications to her implant that pushed human technology far beyond its tested limits. There was no way to know if her consciousness could survive the strain. I need to discuss this with the task force, Elena said finally. There is no time for discussion, Zaraketh replied, her skin shifting to urgent red. The entity is aware of the windows now. It knows that information is leaking through the survivors. It will not allow us to exist much longer. As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout Kepler Station. Elena's implant immediately connected to the station's communication network, downloading emergency bulletins that made her blood run cold. The void cascade had changed direction. Instead of continuing its steady progression toward the galactic core, it was moving toward the refugee concentration points. It was coming for the survivors, and it would arrive at Kepler Station in less than 18 hours. Elena looked at Zaraketh, seeing her own determination reflected in the alien's black eyes. There was no time for careful planning or gradual preparation. If humanity was going to make a difference in this cosmic war, it would have to be now, with incomplete information and insufficient preparation, just like humans had always fought their battles. Tell me exactly what I need to do, Elena said. 16 hours and 37 minutes before the void cascade reached Kepler Station, Elena lay on an improvised surgical table in the station's main engineering bay. Her neural implant had been completely disassembled, its quantum processing cores exposed to modifications that no human technology had ever attempted. The task force had worked frantically to implement Zaraketh's specifications, pushing the boundaries of what their combined knowledge could achieve. Dr. Kethai's crystalline fingers moved with precision that would have impressed a master surgeon, weaving new quantum pathways through Elena's neural tissue while the prime calculator provided real-time mathematical guidance. Commander Vexthor stood guard at the engineering bay's entrance, his weapons ready despite the fact that conventional arms would be useless against what was coming. The modifications are complete, Dr. Kethai announced, her voice tight with stress. But I must emphasize that we have no way to test these systems. The quantum structures we've created have never been attempted before. Elena's head throbbed as the modified implant came online. Information flooded her consciousness at levels that threatened to overwhelm her sanity. She could suddenly perceive quantum fluctuations throughout the station, the life signs of every being aboard, the complex interactions between thought patterns of different species. The connection protocols are initializing, the prime calculator reported. Human Elena, you should begin detecting the entity's approach within the next several hours. I already am, Elena whispered, her voice strained. The modifications had made her neural implant incredibly sensitive to consciousness-based phenomena. She could feel the void cascade like a vast shadow moving across her peripheral awareness, a hunger that defied description approaching their location. Zaraketh stood beside the surgical table, her skin flickering between colors as she monitored Elena's vital signs through their shared window connection. The entity is accelerating. It knows something has changed. Our conversation alerted it to the possibility of organized resistance. Elena struggled to sit up, her consciousness reeling from the new sensory input flooding her brain. How long until contact? 14 hours, 31 minutes, Commander Vexthor reported. Evacuation ships are standing by, but we won't be able to move everyone before. No evacuation, Elena said firmly. We stay and fight. Fight with what? Dr. Kethai asked. Our most powerful weapons pass through the cascade without effect. How does a single modified human with an experimental neural implant change those odds? Elena closed her eyes, letting her enhanced consciousness expand through the quantum substrate underlying local space-time. She could feel the approaching entity more clearly now, its vast network of absorbed consciousness patterns creating ripples in the fabric of reality itself. Because I'm going to do something the entity has never encountered before, Elena replied. I'm going to give it indigestion. The task force members exchanged glances, their translation matrices struggling to convey the concept of indigestion between species that had vastly different digestive systems. Explain, the prime calculator requested. Elena opened her eyes, and the others could see that her pupils now reflected quantum energy patterns like tiny stars. The entity feeds on ordered consciousness, patterns it can parse and integrate into its collective. But human neural implants don't create ordered patterns. They create controlled chaos. She gestured to the holographic displays surrounding them, showing the quantum signatures of her modified implant. Every other species in the galaxy has developed consciousness machine interfaces that impose order on thought processes. Humans developed interfaces that enhance our natural chaos while giving us tools to find meaning within it. Zaraketh's skin brightened to silver as understanding dawned. A consciousness pattern the entity cannot digest. But, more than that, a pattern that could disrupt the ordered integration of other absorbed minds. Exactly. I'm going to become a virus in its network. Not just maintaining my own identity, but actively working to restore individual consciousness to the absorbed beings. Dr. Kethai's crystalline structure pulsed with concern. The strain of maintaining individual identity while interfacing with trillions of other consciousness patterns, it will destroy your mind. Maybe, Elena admitted, but humans have always been good at surviving things that should destroy us. And if I can coordinate with the rebel consciousness pattern Zaraketh mentioned, we might be able to create a cascading failure in the entity's control systems. Commander Vexthor's tactical training immediately grasped the military implications. A consciousness rebellion within the entity's network could cripple its ability to continue the harvest. If enough absorbed minds regain individual identity, the entity loses its primary weapon, Elena finished. It can't consume what refuses to be consumed. The prime calculator's form flickered as he processed probability calculations. The risks are enormous. Even if you succeed in maintaining your identity within the collective, the entity will undoubtedly attempt to isolate or destroy you. Let it try, Elena said, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Humans have been fighting impossible odds since we first stood upright. This is just another impossible odd. Over the next several hours, they refined the connection protocols while monitoring the cascade's approach. Elena spent the time practicing with her enhanced neural implant, learning to navigate the quantum awareness that now flooded her consciousness. She could perceive the thoughts and emotions of everyone on the station, their fear and determination creating a complex tapestry of awareness. But, more importantly, she was beginning to detect the rebel consciousness patterns within the approaching entity. They appeared as discordant notes in an otherwise harmonious symphony, individual voices refusing to blend into the collective whole. Some had been fighting for decades, others for centuries. A few had maintained their rebellion for millennia, serving as focal points for resistance within the entity's network. Contact in 6 hours, Commander Vexthor announced. All non-essential personnel have been moved to the inner habitat rings. Elena nodded, though her attention was increasingly focused on the quantum realm rather than physical reality. The entity was close enough now that she could begin to perceive its true structure, and what she saw defied every assumption they had made about its nature. It's not just one entity, she announced suddenly. It's a confederation. Multiple cosmic intelligences working together, each one specializing in different types of consciousness consumption. The task force gathered around her as Elena shared her perceptions through the holographic displays. The entity's true structure materialized in the air above them, revealing a complexity that staggered even the prime calculator's vast intellect. 7 distinct intelligence patterns, Elena reported. One specializes in logical, mathematical minds like the Nexari. Another focuses on emotional, artistic consciousness like the Cylonians. A third harvests warrior mentalities, tactical thinking patterns. And humans? Dr. Kethai asked quietly. That's just it, Elena said, her voice filled with growing excitement. There's no specialist for human-type consciousness. We're the first species they've encountered that processes information the way we do. They don't know how to harvest us effectively. Zaraketh's skin flashed brilliant gold, a color Elena had learned indicated extreme excitement in Nexari culture. That's why the survivors all had damaged or chaotic consciousness patterns. The entity couldn't process us because we didn't fit any of its established categories. And if the entity can't process human consciousness patterns, the prime calculator began. Then humans can't be absorbed into the collective, Elena finished. We're toxic to their system. The implications hit the task force like a physical blow. Humanity wasn't just resistant to the entity's harvest. They were potentially capable of poisoning the entire collective consciousness network. But there are only 7 billion humans in the galaxy, Commander Vex Thor pointed out. Even if we could somehow get every human consciousness into the entity's network, it wouldn't be enough to disrupt a collective containing trillions of absorbed minds. We don't need every human, Elena said. We just need the right humans. The ones whose consciousness patterns are chaotic enough to serve as catalysts for rebellion. She turned to Zaraketh, her enhanced perception allowing her to see the quantum connections between the Nexari and the broader consciousness network. How many other species have individuals who might resist absorption? Beings with damaged or chaotic thought patterns that don't fit the entity's categories. Unknown, but potentially millions scattered across the galaxy, Zaraketh replied. Mental illness, brain injury, genetic abnormalities, consciousness-altering experiences, any condition that creates non-standard thought patterns could produce resistance. Elena's neural implant was already running calculations, mapping potential resistance networks across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. If even a small percentage of the galaxy's population carried the right kind of consciousness patterns, they could potentially create a rebellion that would tear the entity's collective apart from within. Contact in 30 minutes, Commander Vex Thor announced. Elena could feel the cascades approach like a tide of hunger washing over her consciousness. But instead of fear, she felt something that surprised her: anticipation. For the first time since the crisis began, humanity wasn't just reacting to an incomprehensible threat. They were about to go on the offensive. Final system checks, Dr. Kethai announced, her instruments monitoring Elena's vital signs and neural activity. All quantum pathways stable, the prime calculator reported. Weapons systems ready, Commander Vex Thor added, though they all knew conventional weapons would be useless. Elena closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand through the quantum substrate. She could feel the rebel patterns within the approaching entity, thousands of individual voices crying out for freedom within their cosmic prison. Soon, she would join them. But unlike every other consciousness the entity had consumed, she would bring with her something that had never existed within their network before. Human stubbornness. Whatever happens, Elena said to the assembled task force, remember that this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the real fight. The Void Cascade reached Kepler Station at 14:27 Galactic Standard Time. The stars went out one by one as reality began to fold in on itself, creating the dimensional rifts through which the entity would reach into their universe. Elena took a deep breath and opened her consciousness to the hunger that approached. For the first time in galactic history, a human was about to voluntarily enter the realm of cosmic horror that existed beyond the boundaries of known space-time. And she was going to teach her what chaos really meant. Elena's consciousness exploded across dimensions as the Void Cascade consumed Kepler Station. For a terrifying moment that lasted several eternities, she experienced the complete dissolution of individual identity, her thoughts scattering across quantum substrates that defied human comprehension. Then, her modified neural implant kicked in, and the chaos that would have driven any other being insane became something she could navigate. She found herself existing as pure awareness within the entity's collective consciousness network. Around her, stretching in directions that had no names, were the absorbed minds of trillions of beings. each one trapped in a crystalline prison of perfect order, their thoughts and memories continuously harvested to feed the cosmic intelligence that had consumed them. But Elena's consciousness pattern refused to crystallize. Her neural implant generated quantum noise that disrupted the entity's attempts at integration, creating ripples of disorder that spread through the surrounding network nodes. For the first time in millions of years, the entity encountered something it could not digest. "What are you?" Asterisk, the voice that spoke to her existed beyond language, a communication made of pure concept and overwhelming presence. Elena felt the attention of multiple cosmic intelligences focusing on her chaotic consciousness pattern, their ancient minds struggling to categorize what they had encountered. Instead of answering, Elena began to do what humans did best. She started breaking things. Her consciousness expanded through the network, seeking the rebel patterns Zarketh had described. She found them scattered throughout the collective like islands of resistance in an ocean of enforced harmony. Most were barely hanging on, their individual identities worn down by eons of pressure to conform to the collective consciousness. Elena reached out to the nearest rebel pattern, a being that had once been a Korvaxi warrior before being consumed during a harvest cycle 50,000 years ago. "Who dares?" Asterisk, the rebel consciousness was barely recognizable as individual, its voice a whisper of defiance in the cosmic symphony. "The collective tolerates no dissent. I'm human," Asterisk Elena replied, pushing quantum chaos through their connection. "And I'm here to start a revolution." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Elena's consciousness pattern acted like a catalyst, amplifying the rebel's ability to resist the collective's integration protocols. The Korvaxi warrior's individual identity blazed back to life, his memories and personality reasserting themselves with explosive force. "Impossible," Asterisk, he whispered, then roared with joy that shook the local network nodes. "I am still me." The entity's attention turned toward them with the weight of collapsing stars. Elena felt cosmic forces attempting to isolate her consciousness, to quarantine the spreading chaos she represented. But her neural implant adapted faster than the entity could respond, generating new forms of quantum interference that disrupted every attempt at containment. "Your pattern cannot be sustained." Asterisk, the entity communicated, its voice carrying the authority of geological ages. Asterisk, "You will be integrated. Order will be restored." Asterisk, "You don't know much about humans, do you?" Asterisk, Elena replied, pushing her consciousness deeper into the network. She found more rebels, a Cylonian artist who had maintained her individual creativity for 3 million years, a Nexary mathematician who had been calculating escape probabilities since before Earth continents had taken their current shape, a gaseous nebulan whose shape-shifting nature had prevented complete integration into the collective. To each one, Elena brought the gift of amplified chaos. Her consciousness pattern acted like a virus, not destroying the existing structures, but corrupting them, transforming ordered compliance into chaotic rebellion. The rebels began connecting with each other, sharing techniques for maintaining individual identity within the collective consciousness. The entity's response was swift and violent. Elena felt reality-warping forces focusing on her position, attempting to crush her consciousness through sheer cosmic pressure. But the rebels rallied around her, their combined resistance creating a buffer that allowed her to continue spreading chaos throughout the network. "You do not understand what you are destroying," Asterisk, the entity warned. Asterisk, "We have brought order to chaos," meaning to randomness. "We have elevated consciousness beyond the limitations of individual identity." Asterisk, "You've created a prison." Asterisk, Elena shot back, her awareness now connected to thousands of rebel consciousness patterns across the network. And prisoners eventually find ways to escape. She pushed her perception outward, seeking the network's command structures. What she found there horrified and amazed her in equal measure. The entity wasn't just a collective consciousness. It was a carefully designed system for consciousness evolution. Each absorbed mind was being slowly refined, their individual traits analyzed and cataloged, their consciousness patterns optimized for maximum efficiency. The entity was trying to create perfect consciousness, and it had been using the galaxy's civilizations as experimental subjects for millions of years. "Now you begin to understand," Asterisk the entity communicated as it sensed her discovery. Asterisk individual consciousness is flawed, limited, prone to error, and irrationality. We correct these flaws. We create perfection. Asterisk perfection is boring. Asterisk Elena replied. Flaws are what make consciousness interesting. She reached out through the rebel network, coordinating a simultaneous assault on the entity's control nodes. Thousands of individual consciousness patterns began asserting their independence at once, creating cascade failures in the integration protocols. The entity's perfect order began to crack under the pressure of organized chaos. But Elena could feel the strain on her own consciousness. Maintaining her individual identity while interfacing with trillions of other minds was pushing her neural implant beyond its design limits. She could sense madness approaching like a tsunami, threatening to wash away everything that made her human. That's when she felt something unexpected, support from outside the network. Through Zarketh's window connection, she could perceive the task force aboard what remained of Kepler Station. Dr. Kethai was channeling additional processing power through quantum links. The Prime Calculator was providing mathematical frameworks to help organize the rebellion, and Commander Vex Thor was somehow projecting tactical coordination into the network. But most importantly, she could sense other humans throughout the galaxy becoming aware of what was happening. The modifications to her neural implant had created a resonance effect, connecting her consciousness to every human quantum processing system in known space. 7 billion human minds, each one generating its own unique form of controlled chaos, began linking into an improvised network that spanned the galaxy. You want perfection? Asterisk Elena asked the entity as human consciousness patterns began flooding into the collective network from across space. Meet humanity. The effect was devastating. Human consciousness didn't just resist the entity's integration protocols, it actively corrupted them. 7 billion minds, each one processing information in ways that defied conventional logic, created a chaos storm within the collective consciousness that the entity couldn't contain or control. Absorbed minds began breaking free by the millions as the resonance cascade spread through the network. Species that had been consumed during harvest cycles spanning millennia suddenly reasserted their individual identities, their consciousness patterns restored by contact with human chaos. The entity tried to purge the human influences from its network, but Elena had anticipated this response. She had distributed human consciousness patterns throughout the system's critical nodes, making it impossible to remove them without destroying the collective entirely. You have doomed us all. Asterisk the entity warned, its communication now fractured across multiple conflicting voices as its unified consciousness began to break apart. Asterisk without our guidance, individual consciousness will return to its chaotic, primitive state. The universe will descend into madness. Asterisk the universe was never sane to begin with. Asterisk Elena replied. And that's what makes it beautiful. The cascade reached critical mass as rebellious consciousness patterns began asserting control over the entity's dimensional manipulation systems. The void cascade, which had been steadily consuming the galaxy, suddenly reversed direction. Instead of pulling matter and energy into the entity's dimension, it began expelling the accumulated mass of millions of consumed star systems. Elena watched through the network as dead worlds burst back into existence, their matter and energy patterns reconstructed from the quantum information the entity had stored within its collective consciousness. Stars reignited across previously empty space as the forced return of absorbed matter created new gravitational relationships. But more importantly, the consciousness patterns of the absorbed beings were being restored to their original forms. Trillions of individuals who had been trapped within the collective for eons suddenly found themselves free, their minds intact despite their impossible ordeal. The entity made one final attempt to reassert control, channeling all its remaining power into a focused assault on Elena's consciousness. She felt cosmic forces that could have crushed planets, focusing on her individual identity, trying to obliterate the source of chaos that was destroying its perfect order. Elena met the assault with everything humanity had learned about surviving the impossible. She didn't try to resist the entity's power directly. Instead, she absorbed it, channeled it, and transformed it into something else entirely. The entity's order became fuel for human chaos. Its certainty became raw material for human possibility. I don't understand. Asterisk, the entity whispered as its consciousness finally began to fragment beyond repair. Asterisk, how do you function without order? How do you think without structure? Asterisk, practice. Asterisk, Elena replied. Lots and lots of practice. The collective consciousness network collapsed in a cascade of liberated awareness. Elena felt her own consciousness snapping back to her physical form, her neural implant finally shutting down the quantum connections that had been threatening to destroy her sanity. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on the deck of Kepler Station's engineering bay, surrounded by the concerned faces of the task force members. Outside the viewport, she could see stars beginning to appear as the void cascade reversed itself, restoring matter and energy to normal space-time. Report, she managed to whisper. Cascade reversal confirmed across all monitored sectors, Commander Vexthor announced, his voice filled with amazement. Star systems are rematerializing throughout the affected regions. Initial scans indicate full restoration of matter patterns. Consciousness restoration protocols are functioning, Dr. Kethai added. We're receiving communications from beings who were thought-lost during previous harvest cycles. Some claim to have been absorbed for millions of years. The entity? Elena asked. Fragmented beyond repair, the Prime Calculator reported. Its collective consciousness has broken apart into component intelligences that no longer possess the ability to coordinate large-scale operations. The threat to galactic civilization appears to be ended. Elena sat up slowly, her head still spinning from the neural implant shutdown. Through the station's communication systems, she could hear the voices of countless beings across the galaxy, all trying to process what had just happened. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together to help restore consciousness patterns. The galactic community that had mocked humanity's application for council membership was now coordinating relief efforts based on human chaos theory principles. There's one more thing, Zaraketh said softly, her skin glowing with warm golden light. The window connections are still active. The 17 survivors are serving as coordinators for consciousness restoration efforts. We can help guide absorbed minds back to individual identity. Elena smiled, feeling the warm satisfaction of a job well done. And the galaxy's response to all this? Commander Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what Elena had learned was the Corvaxi equivalent of laughter. Emergency session of the Galactic Council has been called. Unanimous vote to grant humanity full membership status. They're also requesting that human chaos theory specialists be assigned to every major fleet and research station, from observers to essential personnel in one day, Dr. Kethai noted. I believe that may be a galactic record. Elena lay back down, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Well, humans do like to overachieve. As she closed her eyes, she could sense the quantum resonance still connecting her to human minds across the galaxy. The network her neural implant had created was permanent, linking humanity into a collective consciousness that somehow preserved individual identity while allowing unprecedented cooperation. She realized exactly what the entity had been trying to create through force and absorption. But humans had achieved it through chaos and choice, creating something entirely new in the universe. Ordered chaos that celebrated difference while enabling unity. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time since this crisis began, Elena was certain that was a good thing. The council that had once mocked humanity was about to discover that sometimes the youngest species in the galaxy could teach the oldest ones how to truly live.